Hey there, Bruce, and welcome back to Misericorde Volume 1. Now, since the last episode, the full game has come out, and now we're playing the full version. We never actually got to the end of the demo, but the full version does start at the same place as the demo, so I just ran to the same point we were at, so we can just carry on as if nothing has happened, but now we're playing the full version. So that's exciting. Anyway, I woke with a start some time later. I felt hot and uncomfortable as I rose from my bed. I was too tired and overwhelmed earlier to remove my habit before drifting off. I carefully slotted the copy of Medea under my bedsheet and stepped out into the dormitory hall. Hello? Is everything alright out here? I spoke in a loud whisper, not wanting to wake anyone who might have also been trying to sleep. I got no response, however. I peered out into the second floor hallway. The sconces were still lit, flickering somewhat in the wind. Up ahead I could hear a door closing. People were still awake, it seemed. I sighed deeply. Was this the hazing the Superior had mentioned this morning? Flora? Is that you? Margaret? Catherine? I could hear faint laughter coming from somewhere down the hall. Curious, I crept forward. I could definitely hear laughter, and talking, and what sounded like a lute being strummed. As I walked down the hall, the sounds got closer. I realized they were coming from the door next to the library. The Misericorde? I frowned. It sounded like there was a raucous party taking place behind the door. I was confused and a little hurt. I vaguely knew about the concept of Misericorde from some of my reading. It was a room where the rules of St. Benedict were lifted, and oblates could partake freely in red meat and pork and other delights forbidden to us in the refectory on certain holidays. Only half of the congregation was meant to be allowed in at any given time, and yet it sounded like a full-blown banquet was happening behind this door. And today was no holiday. I really wasn't part of the group, was I? I had half a mind to barge in, but I turned around, startled. At the end of the hall, illuminated by sconces, was a tall figure holding a sword. A black goat stood next to them, held by a rope leash. I wanted to scream, but I felt paralyzed. The figure wore black robes. The figure was cloaked in what looked like a nun's habit, only longer, without a wimple or a cowl. They stood taller than any woman I'd ever seen. Slowly, the monster lifted their sword towards me, pointing the blade. As it glinted in the fire, I realized they were waving a large metal gauntlet. I took a step back, but as soon as I did, the apparition at the end of the hall thrust the blade they held into the air. With a rumbling rush of air, all the sconces in the hallway blew out. For a moment, everything was pitch black. The figure's sword was suddenly wreathed in flame. I could see once more. This creature and their pet were an even stranger sight, lit only by a flaming sword. In the red light of fire, their eyes glinted with an unholy sense of menace. Shadows danced through the hall as the mysterious figure slowly lowered their weapon again, bringing it to rest against the ground. After a moment, they dropped the leash that they'd been holding in on the other hand, and raised a finger to their shadowed lips. The goat stood still all the same. Assured of my silence, the apparition lowered their hand to the sword's handle. I didn't dare move or make a sound. I was absolutely in their thrall. Now gripping it with both hands, they lifted the burning sword high into the air, firelight flickering around the hall in an eerie pattern. And then they beheaded the goat in one swift motion. The fire was snuffed out, and I was plunged into purest darkness. Unable to bear it anymore, I finally screamed. I heard booming metal boots against stone. Fearful that it was the beast bearing down on me, I turned to flee, but I got tripped up on my habit. I stumbled to the ground and knocked my head against the stone so hard I could see stars. I groaned in pain and struggled to find my bearings, but I was quite dazed. After a few moments of scrambling, I realized there was a thin strip of light next to me in the darkness. As the sound of chairs scraping was heard, shadows began to pass over the bright line, and I recognized that it was candlelight leaking from underneath the Misericorde door, and there was some panicked fiddling with the latch, and then the door finally swung open. A few of the sisters huddled around me. Adela was holding a candle and looked by far the bravest out of the group. Hedwig, are you quite all right? Whatever is the matter? There's intruder. I lifted a hand weakly and pointed down the hall where I'd seen the ghastly apparition. Adela took a few steps in that direction, but I lunged forward to grab her frock. No, they're armed. Armed? Yes, there was a monstrous figure at the end of the hall carrying a sword. What? What should we do? Marta and Charity appeared in the Misericorde doorway. Excuse my awful hearing, but did you say you saw someone with a sword? Heavens above! I thought we were done with that sort of nonsense. Adela had tugged her robe out of my grip and was cautiously walking down the hall. I dragged myself to my feet. and maid to follow her, but the rest of the sisters, who had spilled out of the Misericorde in tow. Tell me everything that happened, Sister Hedwig. I heard someone knocking on my door, and when I stepped out to investigate, no one was there. So I left the dormitories to see if they'd gone down the hall, perhaps. And then I saw someone at the end of the hall, carrying a weapon and with a goat in tow. Hold on, a goat? Yes, and then they raised their sword, and the torches blew out. Crumbs, I would have been scared out of me wits. I was. I still am. What happened next? I'm dying to know. I suppose it must have been a he, the more I think about it. He lit his sword aflame and beheaded the goat. But not before pointing straight at me. A threat was levelled against me directly. Beheaded a goat, you say? Yes. That's a rather strange story, Hedwig. I understand, but you must believe me. Presumably the head's on the floor, right? We've reached the end of the hallway, which split in two directions. A large door to the surrounding wall of the abbey was open to our left, wobbling slightly in the wind and creaking softly. Where did the swordsman kill the goat, Hedwig? It would have been, well, here. Just about. I gestured around myself in a circle, but as I looked at the stone floor, I realized there wasn't a speck of blood to be seen. Are you feeling quite alright, Hedwig? You must have been seeing things. No shame in it, mind. There's all sorts of odd things I've convinced myself I'd seen in the dark. And you're in an unfamiliar place and all. No, I saw it. It happened right here. Everyone was looking at me with a mixture of concern and annoyance now. Can we go? It's bleeding cold here. Adela's candle blew out. Everyone yelped. The door that had been easing back and forth in the nighttime air had suddenly slammed shut in the wind. The noise echoed throughout the hall with a bone-rattling power. Christ almighty! That just about took me poor heart out. Is everyone all right? I was quite shaken myself, but I soon realised that everyone else was chuckling. I'll admit it. That was a pretty good one, Hedwig. A good, absolutely fiendish. You're a very convincing actress. I was truly bewildered. In the darkness, I could just barely see Marta clutching her chest and catching her breath, but she flashed me an approving smirk. Catherine was attempting to centre herself with deep breaths between exasperated chuckles. Adela's face emerged from the darkness in front of me all of a sudden. She had her hands on her hips and was looking at me in mock fury. We must watch out for her in the future. What's going on out here? We heard screaming. My eyes were slowly adjusting to the darkness. I could see that some more of the sisters had emerged from the dormitories, some wearing nightclothes. Nothing to worry about. Hedwig just scared us all witless with a little prank. Oh, do tell. She gave that most convincing howl to draw us out of the Misericorde, and then she cooked up an ingenious story and led us down here to keep us occupied until the door slammed shut. It gave us all quite a fright. No. Oh, that's good. What did you see? What did you use? String? Not a trace of twine here. She must have known it had banged shut sooner or later in the wind. Lucky guess. Hence the cock and bull storytelling once we got here. You can spill a yarn, Hetty. I give you that. Not half. That's impressive, Hedwig. Hello, hello, hello. What's all this then? Are we having a party in the hallway? The rest of the sisters had caught up. I realised that nearly everyone was here. Catherine, Flora, Adela, Marta, Charity, Margaret, Moira, Darcy and Eustace were all clamouring around me in the hall, engulfed in an orb of candlelight. All except... Where's Angela? Probably busy seeing if she can fit an even bigger stick up her backside. Who cares? Consider it a mercy she isn't here, honestly. I'm not sure that she would find this so funny. I swallowed nervously. The narrative that this had been some grand prank of mine had taken hold so hard and fast that I couldn't possibly push back against it. A happy accident, I suppose, given that it was as clear as day. There was no blood at the end of the hallway where I'd seen the goat beheaded, and no mysterious figure waiting for us brandishing a sword to chase. We should probably get you back to bed, lest the Superior finds out you've been organising practical jokes in the middle of the night. Yeah, she'd be a bit touchy about that sort of thing lately. Yes, although I expect she was more worried about us hazing the newcomer, rather than the newcomer hazing us. Oh, that reminds me. Hedwig, did you like my prank? Your prank? Everyone looked at her as we walked back toward the dormitories in the huddle. Yes, I knocked on your door and then ran back into my room. A small titter rose up from all the sisters. Dearie me. Oh, silly. Eustace didn't want me to, but I did it anyway. I was mostly worried you wouldn't make it back without being caught. I'm faster than I look. Or knocking something over. It was very funny, Darcy. You gave me quite a scare. I forced a smile as best I could, but inside I was screaming. Were the knock and the horrid apparition two separate events? How was that possible? It was hard to accept, although not half the one you gave us. We arrived at the Misericorde door, still hanging open in the hall. Flora? Shall we continue our game? I had you retreating, if memory serves. Actually, I think you might have accidentally knocked over the pieces in the confusion when we heard Hedwig scream. No. Oopsie daisy. I think I've had more than enough entertainment for the night, and shall retire to my dormitory. Likewise. Well, at the very least, no one needs to worry about snuffing out all the torches before bed. Everyone murmured in agreement. The group migrated back toward the dorms. Everyone was yawning now. By now, a few people said their goodnights to each other before retreating to their rooms. I mimicked these pleasantries as best I could, but my mind was completely elsewhere. I wanted to grab anyone by the shoulders and scream at them that it hadn't been a prank. I'd really seen a goat slaughtered in the hall, and that any missing evidence was obviously the work of some witchcraft. I had half a mind to stop Darcy going to sleep and ask her about what she had meant about the Abbey being haunted. She said about goat fire as well, fire a goat, last time. Or perhaps more importantly, tell her that her vision had perfectly predicted what had happened, yeah. I stood in front of my door, arguing with myself, before finally sighing deeply and stepping inside. My mind was racing, but I couldn't ask anyone else to keep pace with me now. Not only was it quite late now, but I'd narrowly, miraculously perhaps, avoided being branded a lunatic thanks to the lucky gust of wind. I flopped onto the mattress. I stared at the ceiling for a few moments, trying to work my breathing back down to a regular pace, trying to unwind the tight strings I could feel around the front of my mind. Rationally, I knew I should sleep. Even after spending a significant amount of the day resting, I was dead tired. But how could I? What if they came back? What if they came here to... I really was tired. I was very, very tired. Well, at least they don't think we're crazy. Yet. Much. Maybe we should tell the Mother Superior about the thing, though. She might take it a bit more seriously. After what couldn't have been more than an hour, I awoke with a start and a yelp. After a moment, I realised I was sitting straight up in bed with my fists raised. Sleep may have taken me, however briefly, but I suppose I could at least take some comfort in the discovery that I would be ready if any attacker had made their way into my room. Whatever good my skinny fists would do against a broadsword, at least. It was dead quiet, save for the light whipping out of the wind. For a light whipping of the wind and a few crows in the distant woods. My eyes adjusted to the darkness after a few moments. I steadied myself and then crept out of bed, sliding my nightgown over my head. I wasn't going to be able to sleep, not until I could be sure I was safe from whatever horrid creature had menaced me earlier. I placed my ear to the door just to check if my little squeak upon walking up had alerted anyone, or waking up. Silence. The stone wall between us were quite thick. Then, carefully I opened my door. Mercifully, it wasn't excessively creaky. While there was little moonlight leaking in through the threshold to the landing, it was far too dark to go exploring without a light. I remembered Eustace and the others had been holding candles when they came to check on things earlier, so surely there must be... Aha! I hadn't spent much time in the dormitory's main room. Sure enough, there was a pricket holding a slightly droopy candlestick resting on the simple mantle above the fireplace. I held a hand in front of the iron hearth cover. I couldn't feel much warmth, but I had to try. The cover was quite heavy. I did my utmost to not make a sound as I pulled it out of the way, just enough to peer into the fireplace itself. Sure enough, a little gust of warmth billowed out. The fire had been banked with ash, just as I had done many times in my cell. Carefully, I stretched my hand into the fireplace to brush some of the grey dust off the embers before touching the candlestick to it. Eventually, the wick took, and I had a little light all of my own. I nearly dropped the candle in surprise. A noise had come from one of the adjoining bedrooms. Terrified, I scrambled out of the dormitory as fast as I could, just as one of the doors swung open. I held a hand over the candlestick flame in an attempt to hide the flickering light. I could hear hushed voices carrying out of the room into the hallway. Darcy! Darcy! What? Where'd I put the candle? Oh, I don't know. Damn it! I've got one here, hang on. Give it here then. Honestly, what are you like? Very talented and smart? Not what I was thinking at this particular moment. What's wrong? Nothing. A moment later, I could see orange light emanating through the threshold into the hallway. My breath was shallow and ragged as I tried to stay as quiet as possible, and I was still turned at an awkward angle to hide my own candlelight. Come on then. Yeah, sorry, I thought I heard something. Maybe it's the ghost. Ooh. Let's be careful what we joke about. Who's joking? Eustace had no answer for this and turned away from the landing, back into the dormitory. I heard a few footsteps and finally a door closing. As stealthily as I could, I left my hiding place and scurried down the hall. As quietly as I could manage, I moved through the hallway toward the spot where the apparition had emerged. I held for a moment as I passed the Misericorde, straining to hear if anyone was behind the door. If there was, I couldn't hear them. I continued onward, my heart beginning to beat out of my chest. What was I doing? The way I saw things, I was in danger no matter where I was. That thing could either kill me in my sleep or catch me out in the halls. I was woefully unprepared in either scenario, and perhaps more importantly, I had a wicked sense of curiosity about the whole situation. I padded over to the spot. I was sure I had seen the figure behead the poor creature, just as before, no blood. The large door that had given us all a start was still closed, now merely wobbling gently in the lighter wind. Slowly but surely I walked toward the door, scanning the floor for any signs of blood, but there was nothing. I reached the large wooden door itself. Presumably the swordsman would have had to have left through this doorway into the night to disappear after their hideous ritual. Curiosity got the better of me. With some trepidation, I slowly pushed open the door, hoping that its creaking wouldn't echo down the halls too loudly. I wedged it open just enough to slip through myself, but not again. The force of the door closing blew out my candle. Still rattled from the sudden sound, I retreated from the hallway. I stood near the pitch darkness once again, although this time I felt more irritated than terrified. Pale moonlight leaked through the main hallway. Was all I had left to navigate with. I held a hand against the wall and slowly walked back the way I came. The windows running along the hallway that looked down to the cloister finally came into view, so I at least had some inkling of where I was now. Heading away from the confounded door, I could see the path back to the hall that my old cell was located in. I stood for a moment taking it in. I felt a supernatural pull toward that old hallway. As I stepped closer, however, I could hear a strange whistling sound. I felt a chill run up my spine, and I decided that I would actually much prefer to be in bed after all. I headed back to the hallway to the dormitory, past the library and Misericorde. Out of the corner of my eye, however, I saw a black shape below the landing. There was someone in the cloister. I held my breath and watched as the figure paced around the grass. Their head was down, and I realized that they could not see me yet. They were looking away from the landing, although at what I couldn't determine. My heart pounding once more, I hid behind a pillar and poked my head around to watch. The figure stood still for a few moments more. A part of me I had never met bade me stay and observe, too curious to escape just yet. Just who or what was this monster? With a dramatic turn, they suddenly left the center of the cloister and disappeared into the shadows around the edge of the lawn. At first I squinted to try and make out where they were going, until a far more intelligent part of me realized this creature could be heading up the stairs. I crept onwards as quickly and quietly as I could, back to the imaginary safety of my bed. It was far too strange out in the halls at night. I made it back inside my small room without a peep. I let out a deep, relieved sigh. As well as feeling terrified, I felt a little embarrassed. My first investigative venture had ended without so much as a hint of a clue, but I was also terrified. I got onto the mattress once more, but I dared not shut my eyes. Instead, I sat facing the door and removed the candle from the pricket that I held. The pitiful metal spike would have to serve as my weapon if that ghoul came to my door. They did not appear. I sat like that all night, clinging steadfast to my weapon and going over everything in my head. Before I knew it, morning came. I dutifully leapt out of bed and dressed as quickly as I could. As I pinned my cowl together, I mused over the best way to face the days ahead. I furrowed my brow and concentrated as hard as I could. The mist that had been lingering in my mind since the superior snatched me out of my cell was evidently there to stay, and if I were to make any forward progress on the task at hand, I would simply have to deal with it. First of all, for the health of my own soul, I would strive to attend all services and meals, no matter how terrified I was. However I may have embarrassed myself on the day prior, it wouldn't do to give up on integrating myself with the others. And more to the point, now that I was no longer an anchoress, this is how I would maintain my worship. I could not compromise on this any further than I had already. Mysterious demonic figures be damned. I would not let evil win. I had broken a sacred oath, but I would slip no further. The fear that I felt, the danger that I faced, so be it, I thought. Secondly, Angela was the only sister who didn't show up last night after I screamed. It was quite possible that she was fast asleep or simply didn't care, but it was at the very least something I could follow up on for whenever the superior next asked if I had any leads. There was plenty else swirling around in my head, but it would have to wait. Hello? Just checking. I opened the door to see Eustace had already turned to leave, apparently satisfied knowing I was up and about. Darcy saw me and gave a friendly wave before following her bespectacled friend. A few of the others were shuffling out of the dormitories and into the hallway behind her. They seemed to have not noticed me at all. In the chapel I tried to find myself a spot in the pews that was neither too close nor far away from the others to be noticeable. What are you doing over here by your lonesome? So much for that. I smiled weakly at her as she sidled in next to me. Service itself went well. I threw myself into the worship, but I had a lingering feeling of shame that I couldn't shake during prayer. Between breaking my oath and interrupting a service by vomiting all over the place, I was increasingly worried about my standing in the eyes of the Lord. I was worried as hard as I prayed. Perhaps harder, if I'm being entirely truthful. It was with some relief that the liturgy ended when it did. The Warriors had been winning out for most of the service. Breakfast consisted of a thin, warm oat porridge. It was interesting watching the others eat. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing some of my fellow nuns less completely put together. Little pieces of conversation floated around the table, but for the most part, it was a quiet affair. There was nothing for it. Sister Angela? What is it, Sister Hedwig? What did you get up to last night? I slept. I tried to ignore the snorts and giggles that arose from the others. I turned bright red and returned to my meal. So much for that avenue of investigation. It's true, I'm sure. She sleeps like a log. Catherine then leaned over her plate and whispered to me in such a manner that ensured everyone could hear. Don't worry, Hedwig. You'll get here next time. When everyone had finished eating, the superior stood to address the table. Everyone shifted in their seats to look more alert. All except Angela, who had already been sitting with her back perfectly straight throughout the entire meal. Hedwig, Eustace, if you'd follow me. Angela, cheer up if you would. Clear up if you would. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Abbess. Angela made a show of rising to her feet. Of course, Abbess. I could feel her staring daggers into my back as Eustace and I followed the superior outside. She led us inside toward the stairs to the second floor of the main building. Where are we going? To the library. Eustace is going to help you get started with your work. Oh, yes, of course. I was the chronicler now, after all. I realized as we crested the stairs that I didn't actually know what that meant. I have my own work to do, just so you know. I'm sure Hedwig will only need your assistance with the very basics. The library was a very odd room indeed. I had pictured it as a regimented hall with organised bookshelves lining the walls, perhaps with a long table in the middle for a shared reading space. In reality, it was certainly a room with bookshelves and a table, but it was as if someone had squashed the idea in my head to fit the second floor room. The table was off kilter. The books were scattered across the shelves, seemingly at random. It isn't much. It's wonderful. I could see Eustace raise an eyebrow out of the corner of my eye. I suppose she'd expected me to balk at the state of the room, but I was thrilled to be in the presence of so much scripture again. Not only that, but there was something about the disorganization that spoke to me. It certainly had the most charm of any of the rooms beyond the cellar that I'd visited yet. You surprised me. Thank you for the vote of confidence. It's rather topsy-turvy in here. I have a system. Have I ever lost anything? I suppose I can't argue with the results. That's right. Anyway, this desk in the corner. This was Catherine's. You'll be sharing this space with Eustace often, I imagine. I see. I was led to a little desk in the corner closest to the hallway door. I hadn't noticed it when we walked in. The whole thing was obscured by a pile of books and folded up documents. It was almost like I had my own little room with walls I could peer over. These large books are what you'll be writing in. And I'll be writing the events of each day previous, as well as details of any important correspondence. Oh, right, of course, chronicling. I tapped my forehead in an attempt to make a knowing gesture. Eustace will sort through any mail we receive and put anything important on your desk to be noted. Then you can pass the documents to her for filing. I have a system. Well, if you have any more questions, I'm sure Eustace will be happy to assist you. I must go and make my rounds with the other sisters before attending to my own work. Eustace and I gave bowing nods to the abbess as she left the room. As soon as the door was closed, Eustace shuffled over to her own desk on the opposite side of the room to mine, with its own piles of bric-a-brac threatening to topple over at any minute. I drummed my fingers on the desk for a moment before reaching one of the massive empty books on the Superior had indicated. I opened it up and marveled at the blank pages. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was back where I belonged. That is, until I picked up a quill. I soon realized that without scripture to transcribe, I was at a total loss confronted with white paper. What should I write, do you think? It's your job, not mine. Yes, well, it's all a bit new to me, now that I think about it. Would have thought you'd given it quite a bit of thought before deciding to leave your cell. Wow. I wanted to say that I hadn't decided that at all, but I couldn't. That'd be that as it may, it's a little different actually, being here. What are you working on? Cataloguing. What's that? There's something that's very difficult to do if someone's talking to you. Oh, I'm sorry. We sat in silence for a minute. I stared at the blank pages in front of me again for a moment, feeling a little stung. Come on, I'll show you. I had noticed Eustace walk over to my side of the room. She was looking over my wall of books with a no-nonsense expression on her face. I stood up, not wanting to irritate her any further. The library here houses a lot of scripture, obviously, but it also carries many other books and documents. For example, recipes, or songbooks. Over here we have a little chess section. A whole section for chess. Yes. I didn't intend for it, but things just sort of ended up that way. How's that? Well, I have a small budget for procuring requests, and some people here got really into chess. I see. Let's see, some gardening books. Darcy reads those, obviously. Some history books. Tarot. What on earth is tarot? You know, fortune-telling. Fortune-telling? Who on earth would meddle with that kind of thing in here? You'd be surprised. I grimaced. The more I discovered about this abbey, the more it felt like it was occupied by a horde of Sarabates. Eustace ran her fingers over the spine of some of the books, clearly looking for something. Ah, here's some classical stuff. Greek plays and so on, and histories. That was all Catherine's department, make no mistake. Actually, she gestured idly around us with one arm. Most of this place was. She read everything in here at least once, I'd imagine. Wow, that's impressive. Well, I've read all of it twice or more, but yes, it's fairly impressive. What's in there? I pointed to the door off to one side of the room, nestled between messy shelves. That's the other half of my job. She produced a ring of keys and inserted one into the door, fiddling with it for a moment before unlocking it with a loud clunk. Inside was another storage room of sorts, only instead of books it was filled with boxes, chests, and what could only be described as a hoard of miscellanea. This is where we keep some of the Abbey's more notable possessions. We've got some relics. You have relics here? Steady on, nothing particularly interesting. I'm actually not sure how many of them are real. Oh. It's a bit of a racket, relics. You wouldn't believe how many people claim they have the holy porpoise in a vault somewhere. The holy? It's best you don't ask. The point is, if you took every piece of the true cross on display around the world and put them together, it'd be taller than the Tower of London. And that's just the Christly relics. With saints, it's even more ridiculous. It's my job to confirm the provenance of the relics we hold here, and I'm not holding my breath for any of them. Well, what else do you keep in here? There's this fellow for starters. She tapped the breastplate of a suit of armour on display in the corner of the little room. My heart leapt into my throat. The glint of metal was all too familiar. What is that? I suppose you wouldn't know what that is, would you? Oh, no, I know a suit of armour when I see one. I was just curious if this one holds any particular significance. We've been holding it for safekeeping for the Receiver General of some well-to-do estate. What's a Receiver General? A well-paid bookkeeper. Oh. I hazarded another question that I hoped would sound casual. And you're the only one with a key to this room. What a responsibility. The Superior also has a key. She's got keys for most things, I should think. That makes sense. In case one goes missing. Steady on. Maybe I have one in case hers goes missing. I glanced around the piles of assorted bits and pieces scattered around the room. Of course. Anyway, that just about wraps up the tour, I think. Oh, are you keeping the sword in here by any chance? I noticed it was gone from the courtyard. It was there yesterday morning and then gone after evening service. Eustace let out a ragged sigh and pinched the bridge of her nose. When she spoke, she had an unmistakable air of someone choosing her words very diplomatically. Yes, Hedwig, I'm keeping Catherine's sword here. The Superior asked me to move it. I'm sorry. Let's go. We've both got work to do. She ushered me out of the little room back into the library. I skulked into my new desk, well aware I've overstepped some boundary. Eustace sat at her own desk and began sifting through pieces of parchment. Occasionally she would scribble something in a ledger. From the sound of it, she was taking some feelings out on the paper. I tapped my own quill against the empty book in front of me. I hadn't the foggiest idea what to write, but I needed to do something. I suppose the date was as good a place to start as any. Excuse me, but what is the date today? It's the 11th of November. Thank you. Oh, fiddle. I wrote today's date, but I'm writing about yesterday. So cross it out. Right, okay. The 10th of November. On the 10th of November, well, a lot happened, didn't it? I felt a flash of inspiration when I thought of all the things that I could write about my life. What the superior had forced me to do, how awkward it felt being thrust into a double life. But I, of course, could not do that. I had to focus on the basics, which was harder than it sounded. How did Catherine like to write things? I do have my own work to do, Hedwig. I know, I'm just not sure how to best write things down. Eustace kept scribbling something in her ledger, not answering. Could I take a look at her old chronicles, perhaps? No, you can't. Why? Because I don't have them anymore. Where are they? Why are you so intent on pestering me about Catherine? I'd started sniffling. I couldn't help it. I bit my lip to try and control myself, but it was too late. Eustace kept writing in her ledger. I was so quiet I could hear a tear hitting the parchment on the desk in front of me. I wasn't trying to be a pest. Don't be so modest, you're quite good at it. I lurched out of my chair. The precarious pile of books on the desk wobbled and I could hear glass shattering as I flounced away, sobbing uncontrollably. I fumbled my way deeper into the library. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to get away. Hedwig! Hedwig! Come back! I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't listen. I ran into the rows of shelves, not paying any attention to where I was going. Even if I had been, it would have been hard to see. I was bawling by that point, with my eyes scrunched up and full of tears. I stumbled around blindly. A few books fell off their shelves as I brushed past. I found a corner in one of the aisles and fell to a crouch, curling into a little ball and burying my head between my knobbly knees. It was all coming out, the embarrassment, the shame, the anger, and the fear. I'm not sure it was even Eustace's snippy comment that really did me in. Eustace was far less intimidating than a disappearing swordsman, but nevertheless, here I was. Alright, we're going to wrap this one up here, because this could go on for a little bit yet, but excited to be in the full version. I don't know how long the demo is actually going to be, but it doesn't matter now. So yeah, Misericorde Volume 1, full version. Let's get into it. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching, Bruce.